everyone, I'm Ivana Smith and welcome back to the channel. Today we're covering one of the most important stories in the world right now. Yesterday, February 26th, 2026, the United States and Iran sat down for what many called a last chance round of nuclear talks in Geneva, Switzerland. The talks lasted several hours, and when it was all over, no deal was reached. Iran rejected the core American demands. And now, the entire world is asking the same question: what happens next? Let's break it down, step by step, calmly and clearly. First, let's understand what actually happened in those negotiations. This was the third round of indirect talks between the US and Iran, mediated by Oman's Foreign Minister Badr al-Busaidi. The word indirect is important here. The two sides didn't even sit in the same room. Messages were passed through the Omani mediator. That alone tells you how deep the distrust runs between these two countries. On the American side, Trump's special envoy Steve Witkoff and presidential son-in-law Jared Kushner led the negotiations. On the Iranian side, Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi represented Tehran. So what did the U.S. want? According to multiple reports, including the Wall Street Journal, Washington came to the table with 5 major demands. 1. Iran must completely dismantle its 3 main nuclear facilities at Fordo, Natanz, and Isfahan. These are the same sites that were bombed during the 2-day war last June, what the U.S. called Operation Midnight Hammer. The U.S. says they need to be permanently gone. 2. Iran must hand over its entire stockpile of enriched uranium to the United States, roughly 10,000 kilograms. 3. Any deal must be permanent, not temporary, not renewable forever. 4. Iran must stop its ballistic missile program, specifically missiles that could potentially reach the United States. 5. Iran must end its financial support for regional armed groups like Hamas and Hezbollah. Now, Iran's position in response to all of this? A firm no on almost every point. Iranian state television reported that Tehran will continue enriching uranium. Iran rejected proposals to transfer its uranium stockpile abroad. Iran insists its missile program is non-negotiable. And Iran refuses to discuss its regional alliances at the nuclear table at all. What Iran wants in return is sanctions relief, the lifting of the economic pressure that has been squeezing ordinary Iranians for years. So yes, significant gaps remain. That's not a talking point from one side. That's the reality both sides acknowledged when they walked out. Now, here's where it gets a little more complicated, because the picture isn't entirely black and white. After the talks, the Omani mediator said there had been significant progress. A senior U.S. official told Axios the talks were positive. Iran's Foreign Minister Araghchi said there were constructive proposals on both nuclear issues and sanctions relief. So there's a disconnect. On one hand, Iranian state TV is saying Iran rejected American demands. On the other hand, both delegations are calling the talks positive. Technical level discussions are reportedly set to continue next week in Vienna at the International Atomic Energy Agency headquarters. What does that mean? It means the situation is genuinely complicated and no one should pretend otherwise. Some gaps may be narrowing, at least in terms of tone, but the core disagreements remain unresolved. Let's hear what each side's core position actually is, as of today. The American position, as Secretary of State Marco Rubio summarized it, is this: Iran is getting dangerously close to having enough material to build a nuclear weapon. U.S. Special Envoy Witkoff warned this week that Iran could be, quote, a week away from bomb-making material. The U.S. says it cannot allow that. In his State of the Union address, President Trump said his preference is diplomacy, but added very clearly, I will never allow the world's #1 sponsor of terror to have a nuclear weapon. The Iranian position, as Foreign Minister Araghchi and spokesman Esmail Baghai have stated repeatedly, is this: Iran has never sought nuclear weapons. Supreme Leader Khamenei has issued a religious ruling, a fatwa against nuclear weapons. Iran's enrichment program is for peaceful energy purposes, and Iran will not negotiate away what it considers its sovereign right under international law to enrich uranium on its own soil. Araghchi has said a fair, balanced, and equitable deal is possible, but one-sided demands will fail. Both sides say they want to avoid war. Both sides say they prefer diplomacy, and yet the specific conditions for a deal remain far apart. We cannot talk about these negotiations without talking about what's happening in the background, because it's impossible to separate the two. Right now, the United States has assembled what analysts are calling the largest concentration of military force in the Middle East since the 2003 invasion of Iraq. That includes 2 aircraft carrier groups, numerous destroyers, and hundreds of fighter jets. And just yesterday, while the Geneva talks were still happening, the aircraft carrier USS Gerald R. Ford, the world's largest, sailed from Crete toward Israel. It is expected to arrive near the coast of Haifa as early as today, Friday. Multiple U.S. media outlets reported this week that national security officials have briefed President Trump that the military has positioned the assets needed to carry out a strike on Iran if ordered. The Wall Street Journal reported that Trump is considering a limited, targeted strike as a pressure tactic not to start a full war, but to force Iran to accept U.S. terms. Israel's perspective is also significant here. Israeli officials told journalists this week that there is, quote, high likelihood of a U.S. strike in the near term. One official said simply, "It is hard for us to see the Americans backing down." Iran, for its part, has placed its military on heightened alert. Iranian officials have said clearly that if it comes to war, Iran's forces are ready 24 hours a day. Now, we want to be balanced here. Military buildup does not automatically mean military conflict. In diplomacy, assembling forces is often a pressure tactic, a way of saying, we're serious. It happened during the Cuban Missile Crisis in 1962. It has happened many times since. The presence of aircraft carriers in a region does not always lead to war, but the risk is real, and it would be dishonest to pretend otherwise. So, what actually happens next? Let's look at the realistic possibilities. Possibility 1. Talks continue and a deal is eventually reached. This is still possible. Technical talks are scheduled for Vienna next week. Iran presented what officials called a technically creative proposal in Geneva. The Omani mediator says progress was made. If both sides can find compromise on the enrichment question, perhaps Iran agrees to dramatically reduce and limit its enrichment program under international monitoring. Without fully dismantling it, a deal could emerge. This would likely involve sanctions relief for Iran in return for strict limitations and full IAEA inspection access. Possibility 2. Talks stall and the U.S. launches a limited strike. Reports suggest the Trump administration is weighing a targeted, limited strike as a pressure move, not a full invasion, but a strike on specific nuclear-related facilities to force Iran back to the table with less leverage. This scenario carries enormous risk. A strike could escalate, draw in regional actors, and destabilize oil markets globally. It could also harden Iranian public opinion and make a deal less, not more likely. Possibility 3. A slow burn stalemate. Talks continue for weeks or months. Neither side backs down completely. Military assets remain deployed, and the world lives in a prolonged state of tension without a clear resolution. This has happened before in U.S.-Iran relations, and it is entirely possible again. Possibility 4. Regional escalation beyond a limited strike. This is the scenario everyone is trying to avoid. A miscalculation, an incident at sea, a strike that goes further than intended, and suddenly a limited conflict becomes something much larger. History shows that wars often begin not because leaders chose them, but because events moved faster than diplomacy could keep up. Georgetown University professor Paul Musgrave put it well when he said that from Iran's perspective, the challenge is figuring out exactly what America wants, because different voices in the Trump administration have stated different goals, from limiting the nuclear program to regime change itself. That ambiguity makes it harder for Iran to know what yes even looks like. Let's zoom out for a moment, because this isn't just about nuclear weapons. There are several larger forces at work here. Iran is facing serious internal pressure. Nationwide protests erupted in January over economic hardship and the government's response. Tehran is desperate for sanctions relief. That economic pressure is both a reason Iran wants a deal and a reason it cannot appear to be capitulating to American demands, because doing so would further weaken the regime at home. The United States is approaching midterm elections in November 2026. A successful diplomatic deal would be a major political win for Trump. A military conflict that goes badly would be a liability. But so would a deal that Republicans or hardliners view as weak, similar to the criticism of the 2015 Obama nuclear deal. And for the rest of the world, oil markets, European allies, countries in the Middle East, the stakes are enormous. Any military conflict in the region would almost certainly spike global oil prices, affect supply chains, and create instability that spreads far beyond Iran and the United States. So where does that leave us? As of today, Friday, February 27th, 2026, the Geneva talks ended without a deal. Iran rejected the core U.S. demands. Technical talks are expected to continue in Vienna next week. The U.S. military remains heavily positioned in the region, and the window for diplomacy, while still open, appears to be narrowing. This is a developing story, and the situation can change quickly. We will be covering every major development as it happens. If you found this breakdown useful, please consider subscribing and turning on notifications so you don't miss our next update. And if you have thoughts on where you think this situation is headed, drop them in the comments below. I read every one. I'm Ivana Smith. Thank you for watching. Stay informed, stay calm, and I'll see you in the next one.